Keith, what do you make of it? I know you've spoken quite strongly before about the Premier League seniors and actually how disappointing you felt they've done in terms of their job over the last few months with these cases.
Yeah, look, I'm very clear on it. I think Pete's a little mistaken here in terms of who's the top of the Premier League. There is actually a chairman, and that's the mysterious chairman, Alison Britton of the Premier League, who has been completely absent from this process. And I think that if this is the biggest penalty ever given to a Premier League founding club, it should at least be the chairman who's getting involved in actually putting forward the Premier League's position. And I think for her to be completely absent is wrong. And in a sense, I think she's downloaded it onto Masters. I think Masters is clearly out of his depth, in my opinion. And I think that this whole issue could have been handled in a completely different way. And we could have, the Premier League's integrity could have been kept intact. But I'm just very confused by the fact. I mean, Everton have been engaging with the Premier League on these sort of issues since 2020, and they've been, lifting the veil on all the finances. All the transfers have either been approved or not. At one stage, the Premier League had told the clubs that there was no charges going to be coming to Everton, and so it's almost as though they've got Everton to give them information for the last few years and then turned around and used it against them. So there are some big issues around how the Premier League has governed this. And let's not forget, the Premier League is only the management group for the 20 clubs who are shareholders within the Premier League. Nothing more than that. And so they really, they've got to respond to those clubs and do a better job, I think, of maintaining the integrity of the Premier League. Right now, the table is a mess. The Man City issue, I think I mentioned before, everything should have waited until that had been heard. And then each case in turn should have been heard. What worries me on the Man City issue is that last week the government were down in the UAE, apparently opening trade talks with the UAE. I'm concerned that the sort of thing that may happen is Abu Dhabi whispers to the government saying, look, we've got a lovely jet order we'd love to give you, but can you sort the Man City out issue for us? And it's those sort of things that do go on that worry me considerably.
Yeah, I guess it remains to be seen, really, doesn't it, what comes of it. But Pete, to kind of vaguely slowly wrap up, you mentioned that April the 8th, they said it was April. It sounds like the second charge might be happening. When will the points verdict then happen, or a fine? Will it be a points deduction? Was it likely to be a sanction? What are we looking at going forwards? Because I think lots of Evertonians are worried that, we've not only got this to deal with, we've actually got another thing in 2 months' time that it's going on. What are we expecting for them?
Yeah, well, obviously, you can never second guess what the Premier League are going to do. They've got so many things wrong with all these charges against these clubs. I think it needs to be done now this season. Let's just get everything on an even keel and get it sorted now whenever we get this verdict. It's obviously difficult when you're then giving points deductions out after the season is finished. We've had complaints from the likes of Leeds and Burnley and Leicester, who are obviously unhappy that Everton were charged, and then obviously these points deductions was given out for this season rather than last season, which would have secured Premier League safety for some of those clubs if the points deduction had to come into force then. So it's a difficult one. I think it needs to be all dealt with now up front and get it done by this season. Otherwise, we're just going to have more ramifications probably going down, because whoever does go down this season and the points deduction is not given until next season will be saying, well, that should have been done this season and that might have helped us stay up. So for the sort of all those clubs involved in the Premier League, all those 20 clubs who have signed up to the rules and saying it's a level playing field, it needs to be done, I think, in the same timescale.
Keith, what are your thoughts? Does it have to finish this season? Do you think they need to step in and do Man City's first? How are we going to make this work?
Well, I saw reports last week that the Premier League have now added additional legal resources, is what I think the phrase was, to assist them in trying to get through the backlog. Well, why wasn't that done before? Why wasn't there enough additional legal resources put in place to handle the Man City case? All that's happened is that Man City have lawyered up to a great extent. I mean, I'm told there's about 30 in-house legal lawyers at Man City. If that's true or not, I'm not accurate, but I believe it's around that sort of number. So they bullied the Premier League. So the Premier League should have, lawyered up themselves long ago and not had a backlog. So there's a big issue around that. And if they're doing it now, then are things going to be in a rush? Are people going to have time to really do this properly? It takes a long time, especially if there's an appeal process. So once again, it seems to be mismanaged in terms of, actually putting the whole process into action from the Premier League's point of view.
And Keith, if we look at the second charge relating to PSR, I mean, this is quite a difficult question, really, but would you prefer a transfer ban or a points deduction? I mean, neither obviously are preferable, but if you were CEO now, what would you be saying to your colleagues? What do you think's better for the club?
Well, I mean, basically, this last January transfer window almost was a transfer ban on all clubs because nothing really happened. So, I think probably a transfer ban is what you'd prefer. But it's got to be the sanction that meets the crime. And, this was a financial issue, and therefore a fine is what I think should really be the main way through this.
Well, Valentine's Day could be an interesting one for Evertonians, so I guess we'll have to wait and see potentially. But Keith, if we move on to the point exactly as you said, the transfer window slammed shut last Thursday night, and really very little was going on. But you can go and listen back to our podcast episode from Deadline Day if you did miss it. Pete, can you sum up, please, the window for us in general? I mean, Keith vaguely touched on it there. How would you sum up the window in a few lines?
A bit of a damp squib is probably the best way to describe it, but I think it's just a sign of the times. A lot of clubs were running scared of PSR and FFP that they didn't want to spend. It was more about maybe getting players out. Obviously, I think Spurs did some decent business early in the window to strengthen their squad. They're obviously happy with their balance sheets. They feel they were able to go out there and do some business as well. But yeah, I think there was 17 permanent signings in the Premier League alone in January, which was a big downfall or down the numbers from before. I think it was the lowest spend in the Premier League in a January transfer window since 2011. Even in France, Ligue 1 was the highest spending league in this January transfer window with 164 million, while just over 100 million pound was spent in the Premier League, and that was really unfounded, really, considering the year before. I think we had 800 million spent in that January transfer window of 2023, with obviously Chelsea spending really big. But now the real concern is that they're probably looking at FFP regulations in these latest charges, having spent so much as well. But yeah, I think obviously clubs now are being a bit more savvy on what they spend. As we saw in January, only 17 permanent signings. Any other signings were loan deals with maybe options or obligations and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely had a massive impact on the transfer window. You could see that from the summer window where we had another record spend, and then we got to this winter January transfer window, and as I said, there was very little movement, especially among the big clubs. I think 11 clubs in the Premier League didn't spend a single penny. You saw the likes of Liverpool, Arsenal not spending anything. Obviously Everton didn't spend anything due to their situation, but probably the anomaly in that was Nottingham Forest. We're still spending money and making signings.
You've just watched a segment from Football Insider's brand new podcast, The Inside Track, with me, Lewis Pearce, alongside the guests on the show. Thanks very much for tuning in. Please do give the video a like, comment your thoughts on the topic, and feel free to share on your social media pages. If you want to listen to the full podcast episode, click the link in the description below. Keep your eyes peeled for plenty more content and exclusives here on The Inside Track.